In the spirit of Halloween, paranormal or not, what is the scariest, creepiest or most unsettling experience of your life? My parents have this old house that was made in the 1910s and at one point was used by the local hospital for overflow. When I was around 13, my dad and I were working on putting insulation in the third floor for winter when we stumbled upon a hinged wall in the bathroom. I should clarify that we use our third floor as an attic and rarely go up there except to get stored items, so we never really did a lot of investigating. So we push this small door open and there's very small, narrow hallways going around the perimeter of the entire third floor. There was this section where the chimney came through and I wanted to see what was on the other side, so I squeezed through with a flashlight. On the other side was a small room, maybe 5 by 5 feet, with a small desk and chair, a little lamp, and a bunch of books and old photos of people. We have no clue what the room was used for, but it was built inside a wall and I would guess no one was meant to find it. Paranormal or not, huh? How about one that falls in the not category? On May 22nd, I made the decision to leave my husband. This was after a lot of badness, including, but not limited to, beatings, threats, not being allowed to work, not being allowed to having friends, being forced to basically disown all my family, and a whole bunch of other stuff that I don't want to talk about right now. While my husband was at work, I told him over the phone that I was going to take the kids to my stepmother's house, and by the time he got home, it would be just me and him. We'd have a date night and talk about things. He bought it, and for the first time in nearly a year, allowed me to leave the house with all the kids at once. Needless to say, I grabbed them, their medications, their important papers, and bailed, taking nothing else. On May 23rd, after nearly 24 hours of constant threats, I returned to my house, with a police escort, in order to grab the kids' stuff and a few things of my own. In plain view of 3 uniformed police officers, my husband beat me badly enough that I had to be hospitalized. And while I have had some paranormal experiences in my life, some very creepy shit that cannot be explained, not one bit of it compares to the blank look on the face of the man that I loved and had 3 children with, as he hit me over and over again, knowing that if he succeeded in killing me, his life was essentially over. Over the course of 3 years, I went from a happy, healthy, employed mother to a burned-out shell that was 30 pounds underweight and afraid to sneeze without permission. I watched my husband go from a model father and hard worker to a man that would beat me in front of the police, while seemingly experiencing no kind of emotion whatsoever. For no identifiable reason. It just happened. He did not merely fall out of love with me, he fell into intense hatred with me. There is not a ghost, ghoul or goblin on any plane of existence that can compare to that in terms of sheer, absolute horror. Was walking home from school with a friend one day a few years ago. Walked past a set of houses and noticed an awful smell. Knocked on someone's door and asked if they knew what it was. They said it had been like that for a few days and thought it was backed up sewage. Anyway, I went back the day after walking home once more and noticed one of the houses had all of its mail stuck in the letterbox. Thought nothing of it. Same routine the day after. There was mail on the porch as the letterbox was still full. Smell was still there. I walked up to the door to try to get the mail inside since it could rain or someone might steal it, etc., etc. As I walked up to the door, the smell grew worse and worse and worse. Knocked on the door, no answer, but through the patterned glass I could see something moving about. I thought the worst had happened and tried the handle. Sure enough, there was a bloke hanging from a coat holder with a bit of rope around his neck and a stool knocked over below him. Must have been dead a while since the smell only started a few days before and he was starting to decay. Called the police and ambulance, gave a statement, no idea what happened after. The house was rented out to some people though. Not a very interesting one, but when I was 12 or so, I was playing with Legos in my basement. I threw a piece I didn't need across the room. It's a very large basement and I was a good distance from the wall. The piece came flying right back at me. I ran upstairs. I assume to this day it was either a ghost or I'm just missing something here. Last Thanksgiving I had an experience with two black-eyed children. I was sitting at home watching TV while my family was out Black Friday shopping, and I heard a knock at my door, and without thinking I opened it. There stood two kids who wanted their ball back. I knew something was wrong with them, and as soon as I placed it, it's like they knew what I was thinking and became more menacing. I shut the door in their face and turned on all the lights, and for however long it was till I passed out, I heard knocking on my door. I think I ended up losing time or something. I remember waking up to static TV and no lights. No one was home yet. I still experience paranormal stuff. Around the age of 16 I was invited to my buddy's house for Yom Kippur. Attending the meal was just going to be me, my friend, his mom and her girlfriend, who is partially deaf. The house was old and supposedly a little girl had been murdered there years before. They had told me before about strange things happening in the house, things that always involved fiery bright lights. For instance, they said that one time they saw a fireball of light slowly coming down the staircase and then simply disappearing. That night at dinner I sat at the head of the table with my back to the rest of the otherwise empty dining room, while my friend sat on one side across from his mom and her girlfriend. It had been a long time since I had heard them tell of any strange things happening in the house, so I asked them, "When is the last time you guys have seen anything weird?" My friend and his mom looked at each other inquisitively and then looked at me and answered, "It's probably been about a year since we've seen anything." Not a second after they spoke, a howling guttural scream of sorts exploded from behind me. Instantly I threw myself forward onto the table and turned to see what I thought would be a dripping ragged wind tunnel, but there was nothing, and it was coming from right behind me. My friend and his mom had both dove away from the sound as well, looking back only to see nothing. The screamish howl had lasted no more than a breath of seconds but left us shook and nervously laughing. We especially laughed when the mom's girlfriend, who has a hearing problem, looked at us in horror and screamed, "What the fuck are you guys doing?" She hadn't heard a single thing. She's probably somewhere on this thread writing about a strange dinner she was at, where all of a sudden everybody decided to freak out and dive on the table for no reason. So I live in a somewhat rural area. It's not farmland, but it's pretty unincorporated, although we have lots of neighbors. A typical southern area, I suppose. There used to be a railroad track that ran through my family's property and through the nearby hunting club. The actual track has been removed, but the clearing through the woods remains. We call it the dummy line. There's always been stories that if you drive back to one spot on the dummy line and flash your lights, you'll see the train light far off. It's an old story, one my dad remembers hearing back in the 80s when he was in high school. Just something stupid to keep the rednecks entertained. My family runs a Christmas tree farm on the land that the dummy line goes through, and it's not uncommon to be out in the field when it's getting dark. My brother, about 13 at the time, and I, about 15 or 16, were in the backfield in a mule, the ATV, not the animal, looking for this lady's wallet she claimed to have dropped. We're using flashlights, shining on the ground in the rows between the trees, when my brother grabs my arm so hard and fast I almost steer us straight into a Christmas tree. I start freaking out on him for almost causing us to wreck, and he just points into the tree line, along the dummy line. There's a single light moving at a decent speed along the tree line. It's all but impossible for it to have been a person, or a reflection. We haven't seen it since in the 3 years since it's happened. I almost drowned in some river rapids. Water is way more powerful than it looks. 2 stories. First one. I remember something from when I was 5 or 6 years old, and at the time, my little brother and I shared a room. I woke up in the middle of the night to go to the toilet and saw my brother not in his bed. I thought nothing of it, went downstairs to toilet and went back upstairs after I was done. When I came back up, my little brother still was not there, so I went downstairs again and checked if he was there somewhere. He wasn't. I went upstairs again and checked my little sister's room if he was there. He wasn't, and neither was my sister. Maybe they were all in my parents' room for some reason, so I checked and found out they were not, and neither were my parents. I went back to my own bed and started crying, until my dad heard me and walked in 5 minutes later. I told him what happened. He said I must have dreamt it. To this I do not know what happened that night. All I know is I'm sure I was awake and went to the toilet. Another story. Since I was 10 years old I've been a diabetic. I was on holiday in France and had been playing all day. I was 12 at the time. That evening we ate pizza, and after dinner until bedtime I had been eating a lot of candy, cookies and ice cream, and did not take enough insulin, so my blood sugar was too high. So I took extra insulin as I had been told by the doctors. Apparently I took way too much insulin. That night I got a nightmare. Everything was infinite. I looked at my fingers, they went on and on, there was no end to my fingers. The same for my feet, tent and everything else I looked at. So I panicked and started screaming in real life, not in my dream, while still sleeping for at least 15 minutes, and I just could not wake up. Eventually my father managed to wake me up. I checked my blood sugar level and it said low, which means it is below 1.0. In the Netherlands it is calculated in mol/ml, I think, not sure. I was on the verge of slipping into a coma because of too much insulin and was rushed to the hospital immediately. 2 ambulances showed up, which usually only happens if someone has to be reanimated.